If you spend any time at all on social media or, watching documentaries, you hear one word just constantly bouncing around. Narcissist, everybody uses it. It's almost a synonym for jerk or egotist. But we have to ask, is this just a fashionable insult, or are we seeing a real sort of widespread shift in behavior? The sources you've shared with us for this deep dive are fascinating. They suggest that while this kind of powerful self-love has been a problem for, well, millennia, its modern form is just inescapable. Okay, let's unpack this. Our mission today is to help you draw a really crisp line between the serious clinical diagnosis, that's narcissistic personality disorder, or NPD, and the behaviors that are fueling a much broader narcissistic culture. We're going to look at where this trait comes from, its siblings in the infamous dark triad, and most importantly, give you some concrete tools to spot and counter manipulation in your own life.
It really does feel like a 21st century problem, doesn't it?
Yeah.
But the pattern is, well, it's ancient. If we look back to the Greeks, you have the myth of Narcissus. He's the son of a river god, famed for this incredible beauty, so much so that everyone who saw him fell in love with him instantly. But he just rejected them all, including the nymph Echo. And his arrogance, as the story goes, is his undoing. He gets cursed to fall in love with his own reflection in a pool of water, and he's just mesmerized.
Yeah.
So unable to pull himself away from that perfect image that he eventually starves to death, and he transforms into the flower we now call the daffodil. The fact that the ancients felt they had to describe this powerful, destructive, self-obsessed love, it just shows us this has been a recurring problem for thousands of years.
That sets the stage perfectly. So let's zoom in on the individual. When that word narcissist flies around, we really need to draw a clear line between someone who's just self-absorbed and the clinical diagnosis. What are the specific measurable traits that separate, a garden variety ego from actual NPD?
That distinction is just crucial. NPD is a formal clinical diagnosis. And while it's significant, we're talking an estimated 70 to 140 million people globally, the sources confirm that many, many more people exhibit narcissistic behaviors without meeting that full criteria. And that's the behavior that contributes to the wider cultural issue we're seeing. But the disorder itself, that's defined by very specific, deep-seated characteristics.
Okay, let's start with the grandiose traits. What happens inside a narcissist's head when they look at their own life and their achievements?
It all starts with an utterly unrealistic self-image. They consistently overestimate their own achievements, their talents. They often believe they are uniquely special or just fundamentally superior to their peers. They're striving not just for success, but for perfection, especially in the eyes of other people. They have to be seen as the smartest, the most successful. And here's the key part. When they fail, they are completely unable to connect that failure to their own limitations. It's always blamed on unfair treatment or a conspiracy or just the incompetence of everyone else.
So they're living in this self-sustaining bubble of imagined superiority where reality just can't get in.
Precisely. And that directly fuels their immense sense of entitlement and their relentless need for attention. Because they see themselves as inherently superior, they feel the rules just don't apply to them. Their needs, their opinions, they believe, should be the center of gravity. And this constant need for recognition means they have to publicize everything. A donation to charity isn't about altruism. It's a carefully staged event to get the maximum amount of praise and credit from their audience.
That sounds absolutely exhausting to be around. But I'm curious, if they're so focused on presenting this perfect, wonderful image, is there any evidence that they accidentally display positive traits, like kindness, just to keep up the facade?
That's a great question, and the research here is so powerful because it just cuts right through that facade. Researchers use a tool called the Implicit Association Test, or IAT. It's designed to measure unconscious biases, which means it gets past what people say about themselves and measures what they actually believe. When narcissists take the IAT, they score extremely high on traits like energetic, dominant, and successful. But when they're tested on traits related to community, things like kind, friendly, or generous, they score really poorly. They truly see themselves as winners. But that deep internal capacity for actually caring about other people just isn't there. It's not in their operating system.
In the final characteristic you mentioned, sensitivity and rage, that seems like the inevitable result of this fragile ego bumping up against the real world.
It is. They feel totally entitled to judge and criticize everyone else. Yet any perceived challenge to their own greatness is felt as a deep personal injury. Because they require the world to validate their perfection, any criticism is seen as the world failing them. And this leads to swift, sudden, narcissistic rage, often followed by this deep thirst for vengeance against whoever dared to question them.
That individual profile is a terrifying foundation. But narcissism, it rarely exists in a vacuum. And here's where it gets really interesting, because the narcissist who desperately wants the stage is just one part of a trio of dark personalities known as the dark triad. So if the narcissist wants adoration, what are the other two members of this group after?
The dark triad unites narcissism, psychopathy, and Machiavellianism. And while all three share traits, like superficial charm and manipulativeness, their core desires are fundamentally different.
Okay, let's start with psychopathy. We hear that word used loosely all the time. How do the sources define it differently from the grandiose narcissist?
Well, psychopathy is assessed using tools like Robert Hare's PCLR checklist. And this doesn't just look at behavior, it looks at the emotional landscape. While the psychopath shares the narcissist's charm and grandiosity, the key differentiators are a profound lack of empathy, a total absence of guilt, and critically high impulsivity.
And what does that impulsivity look like? What's the motivation?
The psychopath manipulates primarily for the excitement, for the thrill. They want to see how far they can push things just because they can. They act immediately on desire, whether it's for petty revenge, a new conquest, or a quick score. They just lack the emotional depth to worry about consequences. It's all about immediate gratification.
So if the psychopath is acting on impulse for the thrill, the Machiavellian sounds like the cold, calculating opposite.
They are the strategic mastermind of the triad. Machiavellianism is defined by a personality that is always in full control. They're purely utilitarian. Their sole focus is power and money, and they see relationships, emotions, people as just interchangeable tools to get what they want long term.
So while a narcissist might have a tantrum when they're questioned, and a psychopath might steal for the fun of it, the Machiavellian operates with this chilling patience.
Absolutely. The Machiavellian is incredibly skilled at hiding their true intentions. They will wait years for a plan to mature. They are not ruled by impulse or a desperate need for recognition. In fact, a Machiavellian might even show incredible generosity if they calculate that it will secure a more valuable asset down the line. Their manipulation is clinical, it's long-term, and it's driven entirely by that pursuit of dominance.
So to sum up the drivers of the dark triad then, narcissists want the stage, psychopaths want the thrill, and Machiavellians want power and money. They all use manipulation, but for completely different internal reasons.
And that diversity of darkness brings us to the next big question. How did these individual behaviors become so normalized that they created what we're now calling a narcissistic culture?
Our sources suggest tracing this back to some pretty big societal changes in the late 20th century. What cultural factors really paved the way for self-centeredness to become so, celebrated?
The 1970s marked a profound cultural shift in the West. We moved from an ethos of conformism, which was dominant in the 1950s where community and humility were valued, to a focus on radical nonconformism and extroversion. The social message literally shifted from be humble and fit in to actively encouraging self-promotion, telling people to claim more space.
I remember that shift, and it was amplified by the whole self-help industrial complex that just exploded around that time.
Exactly. We saw the fundamental goal of human endeavor change. Psychologists like Maslow originally focused on the very difficult goal of self-actualization, achieving your full potential through hard work. This was simplified and replaced by the much more accessible concept of self-esteem. As one of the sources puts it, rather than spending our newly won financial gains on improving the world, we spent our money on self-help instead.
And this then trickles down into parenting, creating generations of kids who are maybe praised a little too frequently and a little too easily.
Oh, the studies clearly map that link. Certain parenting styles lead directly to narcissistic outcomes, creating what are often called golden children. When parents engage in overvaluation, telling their kids they're uniquely special, superior to everyone else, and you combine that with permissiveness, where bad behavior isn't corrected, you breed narcissistic tendencies. The child is essentially treated like a trophy.
The case study in the sources about Linda really brought that to life. It shows the extreme end of that entitlement.
Linda is a composite, but a really telling example. She needed an expensive apartment, so she leveraged her parents' guilt and used threats of self-harm to get it. Later, when she was about to fail a class, she accused her professor of discrimination and successfully frightened him into giving her a passing grade. This isn't a child who learned resilience, it's a child who learned that manipulation works.
And then, as if the culture needed one more catalyst, social media arrives, which is basically the perfect vehicle for displaying that constructed, entitled self.
It's the ultimate environment for what researchers call endless social inflation. The platforms are designed to reward frequent self-promotion and superficial exchanges. And the studies show that people who score high in narcissism are masters of online self-promotion. The entire architecture just rewards showing off, turning the world into this constant, superficial comparison game.
This shift from genuine achievement to just feeling good about yourself is maybe the most insidious part. There's a fascinating study in the sources that tested this directly. What did that experiment show?
This is a critical insight. It debunks the whole idea that you can just tell someone they're great and expect them to perform better. They took students who were performing averagely and split them into groups. One group got weekly emails with confidence-boosting messages. When they were retested, the group that got the constant confidence messages performed significantly worse. Their average scores dropped from 57 out of 100 all the way down to 37.
That's a huge drop, but I assume they still felt great about themselves.
They did. Paradoxically, that same group reported having higher self-esteem than the control group. The study strongly suggests that genuine performance is what drives true self-esteem, not the other way around. Simply telling someone they're special creates a fragile confidence that just collapses under pressure.
Which leads directly to the core problem. How do these narcissistic individuals and this narcissistic culture impact us, and how do we defend ourselves against their methods?
Narcissists employ specific, damaging tactics. The first is love bombing. They shower you with extreme praise, calling you their soulmate after just a few weeks. This establishes a really high baseline of approval. Then that praise is suddenly withdrawn, replaced by stifling silence or minor criticisms. The victim, craving that original high, works harder and harder to regain the narcissist's favor, crossing boundaries they never would have before. It locks them into this cycle.
And then there's gaslighting, the tactic that makes you question your own grip on reality.
Gaslighting is used to make the victim doubt their own memory or perception. A classic example. A narcissist says, "I'm meeting Susan for dinner." Later, when confronted, they'll deny it, saying, "I clearly said I was meeting Sandy. You must be imagining things." The victim gets so focused on defending their memory that they miss the larger manipulation, and they start to doubt their own senses.
Our sources use the DISC model to explain why some personality types are easier targets. Who is most vulnerable to this emotional chess game?
The relationship-oriented types are the most susceptible. So the extroverted, relationship-focused yellows are highly vulnerable because they need public recognition. Their greatest fear is being ostracized, so they'll do almost anything to avoid conflict. Similarly, the introverted, relationship-focused greens are also high risk. They have an intense aversion to conflict and chaos. A manipulator only needs to create a small amount of stress, raise their voice slightly, to keep the green compliant, because they'll prioritize peace at any cost.
So who does better against these kinds of assaults?
The fact-oriented types. The dominant reds and the analytical blues. Blues are naturally suspicious of excessive praise and are good at assessing their own performance, which makes them harder to love bomb. And reds are less dependent on external recognition and are generally capable of setting clear limits. They're just less prone to the insecurity a narcissist tries to create.
But regardless of your type, you need specific countermeasures. What's the most powerful tool for creating boundaries?
The goal is to refuse to argue about your emotions and instead label their behavior as a choice. This is the voice the contract technique. It uses the I feel structure. So you'd say, when you publicly complain about my work, I feel disrespected. If you could share your concerns privately, I would feel encouraged. This does two things. It puts the responsibility back on them to choose better behavior, and it bypasses their ability to tell you your feelings are invalid. You're not saying you're a bad person. You're saying your action has this specific impact on me.
And when a narcissist pressures you for an immediate answer or lashes out in a rage, we have the broken record technique. How do we do that effectively?
This is your ultimate shield against pressure. When you're faced with rage or an immediate demand, you stay calm and you consistently repeat a neutral, planned boundary. For example, I understand the urgency of the deadline, but I need time to consider this. I'll get back to you with a plan tomorrow morning. And if they escalate, demanding an answer right now, you just repeat the phrase without deviation. I understand the urgency, but I need time to consider this. I'll get back to you tomorrow morning. The power of consistency is astounding. Manipulators rely on you cracking under pressure. By calmly repeating the line, you assert control.
That structured refusal, born from earned confidence, really is the ultimate defense. So what does this all mean for us? This deep dive shows that the best defense against narcissistic behavior, individual or cultural, is cultivating genuine, earned confidence.
That is the key takeaway. The short-term focus on external validation, that dopamine rush from likes or compliments, It's a psychological trap. Long-term happiness, driven by serotonin and oxytocin, is achieved through authentic success and actively helping others, especially someone who can't reciprocate. You create internal proof of your own worth.
So if the narcissist in our life is running on the cheap fuel of emotional chaos, our goal has to be the quiet, unshakable strength of authenticity.
And this demands constant vigilance. The highest measure of trust is comparing a person's words to their deeds. If you find that gap widening, you owe it to yourself to set firm boundaries or walk away. If you don't, you run the risk of becoming deluded, a pale replica of the person you used to be. So consider this today. What small, genuine, measurable achievement will you pursue this week to build up true, earned confidence that can't be gaslit away?